Yesterday, over 100K marched in Glasgow in the climate strike. And today was Adaptation, Damage, and Loss Day, a really interesting idea for a day, adaptation, damage, and loss. It was also the day that Barack Obama joined the parties here and gave probably the longest speech of any leader, and he is no longer the president. So we all thought that was very interesting. But today we have a great briefing for you. My role is at leading the technical briefing, and Jude Crasta, my colleague, will be taking over for a fireside chat where he's going to be focusing on engagement. Now, today I am very excited about introducing our guest. I think that we don't often think about all of what's going on in our northern communities. And tonight I'm joined by Minister Shane Thompson. Minister Thompson has represented the constituency of Nahunde in the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly since 2015. He currently serves as, now wait for this, listen to how many ministries Minister Shane Thompson represents: the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources, Minister of Lands, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs, and Minister responsible for youth. That's an incredible portfolio, Minister Thompson. You've also served previously at 6 years as an elected official with the Fort Simpson District Education Authority, and over 35 years of experience on community and territorial boards. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Shauna, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of your pod. I think that's what it's called.
Podcast. Our daily briefings,
yes,
whatever you like to call it.
Yeah.
Minister, you represent the town of Fort Simpson in the Northwest Territories, and I'm really interested to know, from a small northern community, how would you reflect on what's going on here at COP? What's your impressions?
Well, I guess I just need to correct you a little bit, Shauna. I actually represent 6 Indigenous communities within the Nahunde riding: Jean Marie River, Sumbakay, Nahunde Butte, Wrigley, Fort Liard, and Fort Simpson. Fort Simpson being the larger center of the 6. So, you know, I guess the big thing is I tell people we are living climate change. It's not potentially happening. It is happening for the past 15 years. This year, we've seen probably the worst flood situation in the riding. It hit 2 of my communities, Jean Marie River and Fort Simpson. We were prepared for a 100-year flood, but it was a 200-year flood. I also saw parts of our riverbank be taken away in Simpson. So, you know, we live climate change. We've seen it. We've seen, you know, forest fires and how that has had an impact. By Dooley Crossing, we had the biggest fire in the territories this year, which is in my riding, and it went all the way up to Little Doctor. And so we're seeing the impacts of climate change here in the north, and you know, that's just one small parcel of it. So again, we try to adapt as best we can using local, traditional, and scientific knowledge on you know, how do we adapt to things, and again, it's about learning from other jurisdictions, other communities, on how they do things, and you know, how we look at building houses and that, now how we make it more energy efficient. But the big, you know, the sad part about this whole thing is that in the north, we rely on diesel a lot. We do have hydro, we do have, you know, solar, we do have we have a wind up in the Nunavik now. So we do have that, but our redundancy falls right onto diesel. And yeah, so that's some of the challenges. I mean, I guess an example of, you know, we had hydro up in in Yellowknife, and I think it's 2016, and we had a drought, and for 4 months we had to bring in diesel to cover for our hydro part of it. So yeah,
I think what you're doing is making this so real for people to understand how this plays out now. how relevant is this whole conversation going on at the COP26 conference for you? Is this worthy of time and effort?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I had the opportunity to talk to the former minister, Michael Miltenberger, who attended COP 2015. And he talked about, how important it was for the government of the Northwest Territories to be there, to listen and to be heard. And he said, 2015 was the most important one until the 2016 one. We need to be there. We need to have the conversations. We were, debating if we were able to go, be able to attend because of the COVID situation. And because we had an outbreak in the Northwest Territories. It doesn't, we had lost 11 people during this outbreak. Almost 2,000 people were impacted by COVID. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're considering our population is 44,000, 33 communities, and the vastness of the Northwest Territories, we're the third largest landmass in Canada, I guess you would have to say, that there is, but if you add the water to it, then we're the second largest behind Nunavut, our sister cousins. So it's very relevant. The messaging is very interesting. You talk about the national governments, that they need to play a role, the jurisdictional governments, like your provincial or territorial governments, provincials and that. But it's also very important that the messaging is that municipalities need to be part of it, and how they can make a small difference. But if you have 33 communities making small differences, it's a big difference. And then, you do that across the country, and then we're starting to see it. One of the things that I keep on trying to explain to people, our impact on the greenhouse gas in Canada is 0.2%, less than 2%. But we're 3 times as high, or we're impacted 3 times as much. So you sit there and you go, we're doing our best to deal with climate change, but again, we're impacted by what's happening down south in the industry and stuff like that.
Is there an opportunity when you're here to relate to other Arctic or northern communities? So is there anything around a relationship with other Arctic communities in Scandinavia and in Iceland, Greenland? Is there any kind of relationships that you build in that regard?
Actually, Shauna, it's actually funny you say that. I had the opportunity to meet with Minister Lund from Greenland. We attended their presentation. We also attended a number of Inuit circumpolar presentations there. We've attended different venues of the Nordic communities. But we also, which is really interesting, is we've attended sessions of countries and communities that are in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's amazing how some of their challenges that they're facing is very much what we're facing. Like I had the opportunity to meet an individual from South Africa and from the Horn of South Africa, and her situation that she described to us was very relevant to what we were seeing in the north. So what we were seeing is stuff that has happened, in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere are very much similar in nature.
Another thing that we've seen here that I haven't seen quite to the same extent in other COPs is a real focus and celebration and appearance of so many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, raising the issues, framing some of the discussion that we're hearing. And I wonder, given that so many people living in the North come from First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities, has this, are you having to think about these issues and present the issues in ways that perhaps the rest of the conference doesn't think of them? Is there is there some perspectives that are coming forward there that are different?
Yeah, well, like we've had the opportunity to tell some of our stories that we've heard from our Indigenous governments. Like we're not all connected by road. I think 40% of our communities are connected by road. If you bring in the winter roads, then probably 60%, but we have a number of communities that are very much isolated out there that are in the, maybe it's 70%, maybe I should give justice to it. Yeah, 70%, but still 30% of the communities are impacted by no transportation that has to be flown in. But when we talk about the winter roads, what we're seeing is the shorter season, which means that, you know, we have to get more stuff in on the roads to, you know, help the communities out, to, you know, the cost of living and that. But also when you sit there and you talk, it's about, you know, we've seen the lakes disappear. So slumping, like you've actually seen, and we have things on our website, our Environment and Natural Resources website, that show the impact of climate change and some of that. I had an opportunity probably about 2 months ago or 3 months ago to meet with the mayor of Tuck and his SAO, a senior administrative officer, and they were talking about the impact of climate change and, you know, the sea melting and that. But they've done some studies, and by 2050, we're going to have to move the whole community because it's going to be underwater. So you're seeing that. We're also seeing some of the changes of invasive habitat coming up north that wasn't normally available to, you know, because of the climate is warming up, and we're seeing more of that there. But we're also seeing impacts on our wildlife as well. So, you know, the story is you know, it's a huge impact. We're seeing things, and we've also starting to see traditional hunters question our ice road systems. And when I say ice road systems or transportation systems for people go across lakes, we've seen people fall in, like, you know, machines fall through the cracks that would not normally happen that way. So we've had a lot of those anecdotal information from, you know, our Indigenous people that have shared that with us. What we in the Northwest Territories, we've been able to develop a climate change council, and we've done it a little bit unique. What we've done is we've worked with our Indigenous governments, and they've identified people that would sit on the board. So it's not the government doing it, it's the Indigenous governments that would identify it, and we have one seat, and then we meet with them. We're then now in the next phase is to work on there's
not to worry. There's chats, there's questions coming up in the chat, but
yeah,
mostly people want you to talk, I think, a little more about the ice roads and what's going on with the ice roads as well. But please continue.
Yeah. So the thing is that and then we're working on the panel of our next focus is to get panels, a youth panel and elders panel up and going, and then we're looking at expanding. So again, that's going to help us develop our process and our policies on how we do a climate change. So, you know, with winter roads, I think, you know, asking the questions, what we're seeing is shorter seasons, which is having an impact. In, I think it was 2016 or maybe 2018, sorry, 2018, we actually seen the transportation truck actually fall through the lake by Delaney. You know, that was bringing fuel in and fell through the ice. We were, you know, fortunately it didn't spill into it, but, you know, that was the impact, and you're seeing it. But I do have to say the Department of Infrastructure and our contractors that have to do and maintain the winter roads are doing a great job. So, but again, what we're seeing 2 years ago, the roads were getting rutted up even worse, like it was melting so fast. Last year it was a better season, but, you know, we've seen those challenges, and again, it's about being able to adapt to the environment. And our staff and contractor staff are learning from other jurisdictions and trial and error as well, and making it a better place.
Minister Thompson, I can only ask you one more question because of time. And first of all, I want to say, wow, I don't think I've heard quite a description of the real impact, the live impact of what's going on climate as you've described it. So I want to thank you for that. But I also wonder, you've talked about learning from other jurisdictions. You've also talked about having a number of communities. When a number of communities start to take action, then you're going to see change. As you come out of this week, what are you hoping for most? Is there an ask that you have? Is there something that you want to see there for northern communities that we haven't heard yet?
I don't know if we haven't heard yet, but we've had the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to meet Ambassador Fuller for the Climate Change Canada. I had the opportunity to meet the new minister, Guilbeault, but I also had the opportunity to meet some of my colleagues from other jurisdictions and have the opportunity to talk about our challenges and what we need to do. And, it's about, we could do really well with the mitigation of things, but we also need to start looking at adaptation and how we are going to make a difference that way. Also, when I look at other jurisdictions, we got to make it more cost effective for us to, address it. Like I said, diesel is either our default or our source of it. Fortunately in Cova Lake, we were able to put in an array of solar panels, and which we use in the summertime, which makes a big difference. And I had one elder tell me, it's amazing in the summertime, it's quiet. And I said, what do you mean quiet? And he says, we don't have the diesel plant going on. But we have power and we have that. But again, it's the challenges and how we are able to help our residents do our, to change to zero emissions or get closer to it. Again, though, it's working with other jurisdictions, and sometimes we have to allow other jurisdictions to be the lead because we can't afford it. Like Cova Lake, when I said, the solar panels, we spent $6 million for 120 people. Very important, but do we have that type of money available? And no, that's where we need to be working with the federal government. And I honestly had a really good relationship with Minister Wilkinson previously. And I'm looking forward to my relationship with Minister Guilbeault as well. So it's about trying to help residents and things in the north. One other thing we're looking at is, when I'm coming back to talk to the staff, is down in the southern jurisdictions, they talk regional. And when they say regional, it's not region like Northwest Territories, but it's regional. For me, it would be Greenland, Alaska, Yukon, NWT, Nunavut, because that would be the regions that we have similar impacts on it. So
north to north,
yeah. So that's where we're looking at some of these things. Like, I've given contacts out, and the staff that's here had made contacts with their colleagues, and so we're looking forward to trying to make a difference moving forward.
Minister Thompson, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been such a pleasure having you here. I really appreciate that you are here at COP and raising those issues directly. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to shift to our new fireside chat with Jude Crasta. Stay tuned for in 1 minute. He'll be joining us.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience members joining us from coast to coast. My name is Jude Crasta, and I'm your host for our series of fireside chats throughout COP26 here in Glasgow, Scotland. We are coming to you live at 6:50 p.m. GMT, that is 10:50 a.m. Pacific time. Yes, of course, the clocks turned back in Canada this last weekend. And we're at the end of the first day of the second week of COP26. We would like to thank you for taking the time to be here with us, wherever you are. And we are very excited to be joined today by Robin Prest and Nadja Nickel, two amazing panelists who I'm very excited to talk to today. Nadja is the climate director, the interim climate director at Democratic Society. She is coming to us live from Berlin. Her work focuses on ensuring citizen participation in decision-making and building bridges between sectors to find innovative solutions to current challenges, including populism and climate change. We're at a climate conference. In previous positions, she has advised former German federal President Kohler in his role on the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on the post-15 development agenda. Nadja holds a master's in peace and conflict research from Uppsala University in Sweden. And our second panelist, Robin Prest, is a colleague of mine. He's the program director at Simon Fraser University's Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue. At the center, he strengthens the democratic process through dialogue-based engagement and builds the capacity of governments, citizens, and stakeholders to co-create solutions to pressing issues. It's a good thing that COP26 is a meeting point of governments, citizens, and stakeholders. Robin's current interests include improving the integration between engagement and decision-making functions, enhancing the role of equity in the design and delivery of engagement processes, and developing new participatory methods to enhance legitimacy and address declining levels of trust in major institutions. We're thrilled to have this expertise on our panel with us today. So good evening, folks, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Jude.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Nadja, my first question is to you. The main focus of your work is on participatory approaches to climate action. Tell us a little bit about how your work has progressed as a point in time since COP21 in Paris, and what are some of your main learnings so far in that process?
Thanks so much. I also want to thank Minister Thompson, who provided great insights. And thanks so much for sharing some of your learnings and some of your experience with us as well. In terms of your question, Jude, we actually started the work at Democratic Society on the climate issue just recently, 2 years ago. So it has developed only in that time frame. But I would say still in that time frame, we have learned quite a lot. So initially, we started within our work, and especially the different projects that we are engaged in Europe, on a very much participation focused approach, where we would develop certain methods in cities and try to work with civil servants to ensure that quality participation is a given tool and that they know how to do that. I think over the course of time, we have seen that this is not necessarily sufficient to actually address the big challenge that we are currently facing, and that we need a systemic approach to achieve climate resilience. And that is not necessarily only possible via specific methods and ensuring the quality of that, but we need to look at how governance is actually built in the different cities, and how we are able to ensure through those methods the results that we want to actually achieve. And I think that is kind of the bridge that we have learned across the years of our activity.
Right. And so I'll come back to that systemic approach. Before we do, Robin, I want to give you a chance to describe some of your work. We work together at the center and you focus on engagement and public participation. How would you, or would you not, contrast the type of engagement on topics like democracy that you're working on with that of climate change?
Well, Jude, one of the reasons I'm so excited about the idea of talking about engagement at the local level on an issue like climate change is that's where climate change becomes real to people. So often when we're having these abstract conversations about federal policy in Canada, I don't think people know how to connect with that issue. And so when we talk about climate change locally, I mean, when people are affected by the heat dome recently that hit British Columbia, that is an instantaneous conversation into why do we need an urban canopy? Or when people are grappling with issues like, how am I going to, what transportation method am I going to use to go and buy milk or bread? Can I walk? Do I have to drive? Those are real tangible questions that people can understand how climate change is affecting them and how their actions are affecting climate change. So local government is the perfect level to be having this conversation. And it's not just about educating people, although that's a really important component. It's also about listening deeply to people, because they also are the ones who can tell us how are they going to be impacted, what are their values, and how can we co-create solutions that let them feel like they still have ownership over their homes and still feel deeply rooted in their communities, even while those communities change to become more resilient.
So I'm hearing that we need a systemic approach to our climate action. I'm hearing that we need to engage people in resilience, people who are just trying to live their everyday lives. Now, looking at COP26 and bringing it relevant to this conference over here, we have the Blue Zone, the main area where the negotiations and a lot of the programming is taking place. It's surrounded by fences, and there are people of various backgrounds inside and outside that blue zone. There's conversations among national delegates, there's practitioners at the pavilions, there's activists at the protests outside, and of course there's a mix in between. So how does all that's happening in Glasgow, wherever it's happening, get translated to the average person and becomes relevant to them when they're just trying to, like you said, get to work or just get along with their daily lives? And feel free, whoever wants to come in on that.
I can go first. I think that is actually the main point that we're trying to talk about. And I mean, there was a lot of critique around COP that it is actually not necessarily transparent and not everyone can attend. And I think that this is one of the points that we are trying to do with our work, so that the climate action that is actually crafted by cities is not crafted in a very technical approach type of unit that has that specific expertise, but might not have the lived experience of different communities in the localities and on the local level, as certain people marginalized or not necessarily represented in the key governmental institutions might have. And I think that is quite an important point, that we bring those voices into those rooms and try to develop new approaches to the climate challenge that might have a bit more of a diversity aspect to it and a holistic aspect, so that those lived experiences are actually reflected in the solutions that we are developing. And I think that in COP, that was one of the main challenges, and we need to do better, definitely on the local governmental level, to ensure that this is not the same type of usual same voices in a room that are developing approaches that might not resonate with the everyday people.
Robin?
Yeah, what I would add to that is that I think that often when it comes to engagement, expectations are very low on both sides. You have, the old cliche saying that you can't fight City Hall and the feeling of disempowerment, and you certainly see that in the protest movements that are around COP. And then also on the stage, when I go into the Blue Zone and I hear what folks are saying on the stage, so many of them are saying we need to listen to the people, but very few are actually giving specifics about how we go about doing that in an effective way. And so the first thing that I think needs to happen is that if we're going to ask people to help co-create solutions, they need to see how their ideas are acted upon. Even if it's to say we couldn't do that and here's why, there needs to be that call and response, and ideally in a way that's iterative and builds the conversation and brings in experts and brings in city staff and elected officials and residents equity-seeking communities to understand, to be in conversation with one another. We've seen that in Canada in small one-offs. So for instance, within Edmonton, there was a citizens assembly on Edmonton's energy strategy. Within Montreal right now, there's a fantastic green participatory budgeting process that I've heard buzz around within the international community. I think there's $10 million on the table for residents to help decide what projects are going to go forward. And within the work we're doing right now within our office with the City of Burnaby and Van City, we've actually worked with Burnaby City Council, which has agreed to do a citizens assembly on livable and resilient neighborhoods and a task force to try to mobilize work on retrofits. Because those are some of the areas where they told us they were getting stuck. And so we've designed an engagement process to try to unstick difficult issues in an authentic way. And council has agreed through a memorandum of understanding to respond to both of those processes directly to say, yes, we can do this, we'll follow this, or no, we can't, and here's why. And that's what authenticity looks like. There's an accountability and there's a two-way conversation and not just thanks, we heard from you, and now the adults are going to go into a room somewhere and make a decision and not going to report back to anyone.
Right. Okay. And so let's look at today then. You've talked a little bit about this, but now we've just watched earlier today, former President Obama gave a speech, a pretty big speech at COP26. It was quite lengthy, covered a variety of issues, but for a lot of those portions, one could, I think, successfully argue was talking about engagement down to the local relevant levels. One of the things he pointed out there was the majority of people who sit in the sort of middle. You have your climate deniers who are hardened in those positions, but you also have your activists who are already convinced. But then you have those majority of the people, like you folks are mentioning, who are not necessarily against action, but feel that there are other priorities that really shift. So for those who are stuck in other competing priorities, how do governments or systems or civil society then go and engage them specifically in this climate action? Robin, you can go ahead first, and then Nadja.
Okay, yeah, and this is a great question because it speaks to another strength that happens in local government engagement that's so difficult to do otherwise. The best engagement is always relationship-based. And so if we can engage in ways that actually we get to know one another, where we can call upon each other and ask questions and continue to build on those relationships, that has resiliency, and that's what will carry us through a multi-decade transition. If it's just a transaction where people fill out an online survey and then that's that, even if you act on the information, you're throwing away that human capital where you can co-create and work together and implement together. So the great thing about local government is that it can activate relationships. And I think about whether it's people who care about their neighborhood. I think about people who care about their mosque or their church, people who care about their school. Well, let's have conversations in those locations. And then what happens is that people join the conversation, not because they're interested in climate change, but because they're interested in those existing relationships and identities that they have. And then you're widening the conversation in a way that both brings people into the conversation, but also then they change the conversation. They might say, hey, have you thought about this here? And maybe government hasn't. I think about the pandemic, and I think about just how little government was planning for the gender-based impacts of the pandemic until we got partway through, and then the alarm bell starting going off as far as, okay, this is impacting women a lot more than it's impacting men, and what can we learn about that, and what's the policy response? And on climate change, we don't want to make the same mistake. We have time to have the conversation ahead of time so that we can make sure that we're heading off those types of unequal impacts and hearing from those people who are going to be impacted the most.
Mm-hmm. Nadja?
I think that the climate challenge is one of the greatest challenges that we're facing, and nobody so far has the silver bullet, the main approach that will lead us to the perfect outcome. And I think that this is a reflection in itself, where we might want to ask ourselves, is the usual type of leadership that we have been used to, where it was basically this top-down approach. City government knows it all, and at least from the German perspective, is the one that is carrying out all the solutions. And I'm wondering if we are actually moving towards a new type of leadership that is needed, that is relational, as Robin said, and that is also in a way humble about what it knows and what it doesn't know. And by actually engaging with those different communities, we can not only build trust between each other, between the government and the people that the government is serving, but also learn about those experiences, about what works and what doesn't work and why. And I think that kind of question, the why doesn't it work or what is missing, is really important, so that we get into the routine of talking to each other and engaging around what might be developed and what we can do together to not only ensure that, you know, we kind of come through, but also in a way that is actually social just, and keeping those communities in mind, and that are mostly at the forefront of climate change as we see it today.
Yeah, so Nadja, let's look a little closely at some of your work. You're saying that you want to make climate action a democratic, not a technocratic issue. I found this checking out the background that was visible online. How do you think the technocratic processes involved in these climate discussions, or discussions like this one, can be then transformed into democratic ones, while at the same time staying scientifically honest as that science evolves?
I think that's a really good question. And most of the time, what we have been seeing working with European cities is that the technocratic departments, in a way, stay close to each other and don't necessarily engage as much with the people that they are actually trying to serve and to work with. And one of the approaches that we are trying to do is actually bringing those different voices to the table and ensuring that by introducing different methods, we're not only connecting people and ensuring that there's a bit of trust development between them, but we are also trying to build those democratic infrastructures that might actually prolong the process and ensure that the engagement is not a one-off type of activity, but leads to ongoing engagement throughout. And I think that if we bring those expertise together, there's quite a lot of gold in there and quite a lot of wisdom where people might learn from each other and develop new ways of working that are currently not necessarily on the table.
So a question to you both. We have in our audience today a lot of Canadian cities, local governments who are looking right now to learn on your work, to learn from your work on engagement. We have COP26 that's taking place. A lot of them can be here physically in Glasgow to have the sort of interactions that we're benefiting from. What would you like to see in terms of a message to them, changed, expanded, removed, or added to citizen participation that exists on this issue, or maybe might not even exist yet? Let's start with Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Jude. And when it comes to citizen participation, I know that one question I often hear from cities and other actors is, how do we make the time and manage the complexity of one more input into our decisions? And I think that there are legitimate cases where sometimes government just needs to lead. But what I would say is that if we're trying to build the long-term momentum and the shared vision that's going to get us through a multi-decade transition and all the really hard times we're going to be going through, government can't do it alone. And the best place to start is where you're having the most trouble. So where are you stuck? What is the question that you authentically don't know the answer to? And that's where you start engaging, because then there's actually usefulness that's going to come out of that process. So I think that that those are really good questions to start and to focus on. There's such creative things happening, and in the conversations I've had with you, Nadja, learning about the work going on in Europe, there's just such exciting ways of activating across an entire system. There's processes that we've been hearing worldwide where governments are using citizens and residents in order to actually map where are the vulnerabilities, what are the assets that we want to build upon, who's going to be impacted. So actually working in a participatory mapping process. Or maybe there's situations where governments want to increase the urban canopy, and could it crowdsource the planting of trees so that people are actually involved in going out and planting trees on their in their yards or otherwise. So there are all these problems, and if you're getting stuck on a problem, it's great to think about how could I use help and what is the productive way that we could work together on this. Then there's the big policy issues, things like how are we going to view density within our city, recognizing that density can create some favorable conditions, but it can also create a situation where some residents feel displaced and they feel either because they can't afford to live there anymore, or because some residents might feel like this isn't their home anymore. And so how do you have an honest conversation about how do we create livable neighborhoods and resilient neighborhoods at the same time? And that's only the sort of thing that can take place if you actually put all the different trade-offs on the table and work through it as a community. And at the end of the day, if people can get to a point where they say, I don't agree, but I think that the process was fair, and I can see that there are other legitimate perspectives too. That is a fantastic place to end off in a conversation, and that's possible through the tools we have, like deliberation and wide-scale dialogue methods.
Nadja?
I want to talk to the European case because I, of course, am from Europe. So, but I think that quite a lot of that also is relevant for Canada and other parts of the world. I think one of the main points that I want to make is that we a lot of times talk about engaging citizens in approaches, etc. What I really want to ensure is that this is a meaningful process, that those are not only empty words that we are filling just for the sake of it, but actually are ensuring that citizens are engaged and are part of that approach that we are taking here, because we want to make sure that they are not only, the object that are being flung around within the climate debate, but actually are active agents that can take the change upon themselves and be engaged in this new world and the new future that we are creating. And I think that's also, in a way, my second point, that I want to ensure that we imagine a different world that we might have even desire for. And I think that at the moment, the rhetoric is quite negative and quite, in a way, against a lot of things, against fossil fuels, against cars, against meat, etc. But what we are actually for, that the future that we want to live in, I want to create that together with different communities and create that imagination for something that we actually desire and delight in to be in. And I think that is quite an important part to come together around and ensure that people have a stake in it and have also the means to participate in that future.
Right. So that I find that absolutely encouraging. Like, what are we trying to build? What are we trying to work for as opposed to work against? That's a great message, and I hope it's really sinking in for a lot of our viewers at home. So we're just about at time, but before we go, both of you are working on such amazing initiatives, and you have a lot of activities that you're currently undertaking, some at COP, some not at COP. I want to give you both the opportunity to gain more public participation through your activities. So if there's anything you would like to plug here for each of your work, this is a great space to do so. Let's start with you, Robin.
Well, Jude, maybe I won't plug our work, but I'll plug an idea. I'm very excited right now at the prospect of how cities can work better with the schools around them. And the reason I say that is that creating opportunities where young people can exercise leadership is so important, and actually have the agency to create change and not just feel like they're shouting into the wind. So whether that's having opportunities for students to host dialogues with their parents on certain issues, or whether that's putting up pots of money so that students can come up with proposals for climate action and vote and get that funded. There's just so many models right now in the school system. And the great thing about working in the school system is that the entire community is there. Every sort of person and family is represented within the school system. Mm-hmm. And it's also a system that already exists. So you don't need to create a new structure. You need to deepen that structure and show it that it can actually have impact on the world around you. So that's one place that I start: schools, libraries, community centers, leaning into those existing institutions.
Absolutely. Nadja.
Well, actually, we are based on the work that we did over the last 2 years, we're now also part of the Net Zero Cities project, which is actually part of the European Green New Deal, which is quite an exciting project, and hopefully able to serve 100 European cities towards climate neutrality. And I think it just kicked off 2 weeks ago, so it's a brand new shiny project, but we are quite excited to learn a bit more together with the community and also international community on how to actually do local very well in such a big project. And if we're thinking international, how can we ensure that these democratic practices that we are learning from and developing are actually serving those wider cities and embedded in the climate approach that we are taking internationally?
All right, so I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but Nadja, Nicole, Robin, Prest, thank you so much for joining me this evening here in Glasgow, this morning here in the Pacific. But to all of you folks back at home in Canada, we're here every night until November 11th, live at 6:30 p.m. GMT. That is now 10:30 a.m. Pacific, and you can calculate down the country. We look forward to seeing you back here as we come to you with all the daily proceedings that take place at COP26. Thank you so much. Have a good morning, have a good afternoon, have a good evening, but also goodbye.